I'm Jeff Teichert. This is my wife, Kathy, and we are presenting for the Family Life Conference. The subject is Intentional Courtship, Peace, Amid Singles Guide to Peace, Progress, and Pairing Up in the Church of Jesus Christ, which is also the title of our book that's soon coming out. We're also going to talk about our new organization called Love in Later Years, which is to minister to mid-singles. So without further ado, I will let Kathy get started on the presentation about our organization. And we will share our screen with you so that you can see it. And look forward to sharing it with you.
Thank you for joining us. Love in Later Years was created to educate and minister to Latter-day Saint mid-singles who desire intentional and loving relationships. Later includes anyone beyond the possibility of a traditional first marriage in their 20s. Love tends to get more complicated after that, and our organization is designed to explore those dating and relationship complexities. Eventually, we are going to expand Lily to support and invite those who have formerly been mid-singles to explore the complexities of blending families and intentional marriage, which is the theme of this year's Family Life Conference. We have an official flower for Lily because Love in Later Years Lily stands for that. And as a flower, we wanted to do a little research, and we found out that even though it looks like it has 6 petals, it has 3 petals and 3 sepals, which are there to protect the petals. Most flowers, the sepals are green, but on the lily flower, they look almost exactly like the petals. How do lily flowers bloom? They need the right climate and environment, adequate sunlight and nourishment, protection from pests and disease. They bloom once per season, and they bloom at the right time, not right after being planted and not after many years of being planted. And they're open to blooming. So how that relates to people, we need a good environment and the right climate in our homes and in our lives. We need good self-care. We can banish negative thoughts when they happen so that we can protect ourselves and our spirits and live our highest life. Also, we can seize opportunity when it comes so that we're blooming where we're planted when the right time is for us to bloom. Also,
unlike the lily, we can bloom in later life too, which we have in finding the love that we share.
Well, and we're going to continue blooming throughout our lives as a married couple. So later years, of course, anything beyond, that traditional first marriage in the 20s, latest years is when we want to have had love. Like we want to have warm memories, and we need to be patient for the right time to bloom. I know after my divorce, I felt very much in a hurry to, get back into a relationship because I felt uncomfortable being alone. Of course, many years passed and until, and Jeff and I found each other, and the timing, had to be right for us individually. And so we require patience for blooming, and yet also persistence. We don't think it's ever too late, ever, to bloom in love and as a person. But if we all have our own timeline and our own rhythms, then we want to be persistent in pursuing our best life and our forever partner, or at least be keeping an eye out for that person and being intentional about finding them. And then last but not least, as you can see, some of those blooms are closed. They're not open yet. In order to bloom, we have to be vulnerable. Any kind of love relationship requires some risk and some willingness on our part. Okay, next. We like to, we believe that there's symbolism in things, and for our purpose and for our lily, the first petal is peace. That lays a foundation for a good relationship in the future. And the first sepal is resilience. Resilience protects peace, which is paramount to becoming whole as a new mid-single. Healing from adversity, heartbreak, and disappointment rather than remaining stuck is essential to obtaining and protecting inner peace. So as you can see, that black lily represents the trials in our lives, and it's still beautiful. It's a darker time in which we get that challenge of finding peace again. The second petal and sepal is progress and intention. Intention protects progress by getting purposeful about our efforts and actions. This moves mid-singles in a direction of their desires and deliberately cultivates what's in their highest good. This includes investing in loving relationships. And like we said, in the latest years of life, we'll have the assurance of eternal love and blessings of warm memories. This is the essence of love in later years, is to be able to have those warm memories when we're older by making the effort, no matter where we're at right now, whether we're 40, 50, 60, 70, if we've never really known, a true and good love match, that it's never too late, no matter what our circumstances, to make an effort in that direction. The third petal and sepal is pairing and faith. Faith promotes pairing by opening the doors to the love of God, which ultimately leads us to love ourselves and others, which is our two greatest commandments and the source of our greatest joy. Having faith that our loving Father in heaven knows our deepest desires can provide faithful reassurance that a power greater than our own is at work in our lives. And I love that. And as you can see, those two beautiful white petals represent two individuals who have found peace and laid that foundation and have made progress through intentional effort to be paired through faith and in walking a path that trusts that God is aware of our righteous desires.
I think sometimes we think our lives and the most important decisions all depend on us. I felt that way when I was a new missionary, that I had to have all the answers for everybody's questions. And once I realized that I could sit back and watch God work and do my own little part, things were better. And I think the same thing is true in finding your eternal companion, that if you have faith that God can guide you, he can bless you at any season of life.
Right. So this is a diagram that we had created so that we could share our three petals and three sepals of our love in later years lily. Resilience, as you can see, is at the bottom as we bounce back from adversity and therein find peace. Then we set our intentions and we set the stage for progress, which raises us to our highest potential, as you can see, is at the top. Along the way, we have faith that God will provide our righteous desires in his own way and time. And then we're blessed with a divine design pairing, not just with a significant other, but with experiences that eventually lead us to our forever love with whom we can create a bright future. And as you can see, pairing moves us forward. Pairing of any kind, pairing with a life purpose, pairing with a companion. Pairing can happen by having faith and setting intentions and being resilient and bouncing back and being willing to grow. This is what our Savior said about lilies. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. If God so clothe the grass of the field, shall he not much more clothe you? Your heavenly Father knows what you need. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. We love that scripture. It works really well with our love in later years theme.
Our Father in heaven knows our deepest longings and our deepest needs, and like the lily that clothes the grass, never give up on when he can bless you with something beautiful.
Right. To us, the lily represents glorious blessings of the loving Father who knows what we need and has the power to provide it. We hope the lily of resilience and peace, intention and progress, faith and pairing up will bloom in every season of your life. We are on Instagram. We have a Facebook page and a Facebook group. We're on Twitter. We have a YouTube channel in which we'll put this on as well. And we have a website. We are pretty new to this, and so we're growing. We would love to have you come and like our pages and our group and belong to our groups, especially if you are a mid-single, or if you've had experience as a mid-single, or you work with mid-singles as a therapist or a member of a bishopric. Your comments can be valuable to our members, and we welcome all of you to join.
Yeah, help come grow the body of knowledge that we're building about an underserved part of our population. We would love to have you.
All right, we'll skip the question and answer since this isn't live. But
yeah, we did appreciate that before, but didn't get it recorded right. So
please let us know if you have any questions, though, by sending us a message online.
Yeah, that would be great.
And I would love to introduce our book. It's Intentional Courtship, and it's divided into our lily petal parts. The first 8 chapters are all about peace and laying a foundation for the dating adventures that follow. And that's, a progress. That part 2 is progress. And that's like chapters 9 through, I think, about 14, I think. And then the rest of our book through chapter 20 is pairing up, getting serious. And we're excited to share some highlights with you. I'm going to turn the time over to Jeff, who is going to discuss just a little bit from our book. Obviously, we can't cover 20 chapters in a few minutes, but he'll give you some good information, and hopefully when our book is published, you'll be able to read more. And we're excited. It's going to be a great book. We have it fully written, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from various readers, and
including best-selling authors who really think it's something that's needed. So
right.
This graphic you see before you shows a knight being dubbed in a court. Courts nowadays, we think of courts and we think about legal courts. And as an attorney, I've appeared in court many times. Of course, the use of the term court descends from courts of kings in days gone by in particularly many European countries. And courtly, you think about courtship. Why do we think of pairing up with another person in terms of the courts of kings? Well, that descends from chivalry and courtly love. Kathy did some research on the definitions of such things. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Well, I share some of the most beautiful wording in our book, and I don't have it memorized, but it's really eloquent. I think it's a great way to live. I don't personally find it offensive when someone offers to open the door for me. I think that's kind. I think it's courteous. I'm a Suzuki teacher, a violin teacher, and during our lessons, we bow to each other, and that's a very polite way of being. I think that that represents chivalry. The old-fashioned courting is really beautiful concept.
Holding each other up, really on a pedestal in some ways, is a beautiful thing. We heard from Wally Goddard, in fact, that the happiest marriages have one thing in common, and that is that the people see things in each other that nobody else does. And that's kind of a beautiful idea. Now, here's a not so beautiful idea. 73% of people on their third marriage, which Kathy and I each are, 73% of those end in divorce. Well,
that is a sad statistic, and we could be depressed about it, but
we want to turn it on its head. So 27%, you're telling me there's a chance. Now, we talked about this actually a lot before we got married. And how are we going to be among the 27% and not the 73%? How are we going to overcome those odds? And the decision we made at that time is that we have to be very intentional about our relationship. That means we make agreements with each other about how we're going to handle certain things in our relationship, and we stick to them. And they need to be the right agreements. They need to be things that will help. And as we go, we're going to talk about that.
Well, and in the Family Life Conference, we talked about a growth mindset. And that's something Jeff and I really love about each other, is that we've been growth oriented since I think probably since before we became mid-singles, but we definitely lived that when we were mid-singles, and we live it as a couple now. We are always interested in growing and learning together, and that really works well for us. And I think it seems like the right way to be in terms of the gospel. I mean, we're asked to be disciples of Jesus Christ, and we can only do that by making that effort every day. I mean, it takes a lifetime to grow those characteristics.
The Lord gives us ways of doing that. He asks us to be intentional, for example, by making covenants with Him and keeping them, and it focuses the mind on certain principles and ideas. When we talk about dating, every accomplishment begins with the decision to try. And that's an intention-based idea too, that you may have gotten discouraged, you may feel like you'd lack the social skills or whatever if you're a mid-single, but we encourage you to make a decision to try, a new decision, a renewed decision. And that's where any good thing that comes into your life begins. Another favorite saying of mine is that if you refuse to risk failure, you insure it. And many of our mid-singles refuse to risk.
I think this is a good time to insert the fact that, let's go back to that other slide real quick. We had this realization recently that us becoming mid-singles after being married for 10 plus years each was so uncomfortable. And we've talked with mid-single friends of ours who've always been single and never been married, and their thoughts on becoming a married couple are very similar. It's very overwhelming for them to think about getting married, just like it was overwhelming to us to become mid-singles. And we President Bednar in conference talked about comfort, like that we're no longer really being offered the road of comfort where we're just kind of like lackadaisical going along, halfway in the gospel, halfway in the world kind of thing. And so it seems that growth really can't coexist with comfort. We have to be willing to get out of our comfort zones to do things we've never done before, because that helps us grow and learn.
What's in the way? Some of the things Kathy just talked about, pain and trauma. Virtually every mid-single that I met during my mid-single years, and I was in the mid-single community for almost a decade, virtually every mid-single has some of this, resulting from divorces, from being widowed and losing someone they loved that way, or even just through going through many different experiences where they may have lost a love that didn't result in marriage, or felt like they never got anywhere and that there was something wrong with them, that that nobody married them or whatever. There seems to be many paths to this, but many have pain and trauma, and as a result there's a fear of rejection, pain, or not being enough. Why would I risk love if love ends in pain? How do we overcome this fear? Recognize cognitive distortions. I want to tell you a story. It's a little bit vulnerable for me, but when Kathy and I were early in our dating time with each other, every weekend, every other weekend, she had her children with her, and during those weekends, we didn't typically see each other. But one of those weekends, I was coming to her town, an hour away from where I lived, and uh, I suggested that we get together and have breakfast that morning. I was going to a baptism later in the morning, and that might give us a chance to see each other before her kids were really up and at 'em, and she agreed. Well, I came to town the night before so that I wouldn't have to make the drive at 5 o'clock in the morning to get there in time for our breakfast, and I was just going to stay with my brother, and did. But I let Kathy know that I was in town, and she texted me to come on over and visit. So I did, and she invited me in to meet her children, and I met her children for the first time, and we spent probably 5 hours together, including the first couple hours with her kids, and I helped to put them to bed, and it's fun to get to know them. And then we spent until probably 1 a.m. talking, and it was a very pleasant conversation. And as I'm getting ready to leave to go over to my brother's house where I was going to stay, Kathy said, I don't really want to be up late tonight and then up early tomorrow morning on a weekend. I have the kids. And so we should probably cancel the breakfast. And I said, okay. But then as I was leaving, I felt rejected. Now, her request to cancel the breakfast under the circumstances was completely reasonable. But cognitive distortions are not reasonable. Anyway, I was feeling rejected. Did I overstay my welcome? I was second guessing myself. Is she sick of me? Did I say something that bothered her? All these thoughts are going through my head, and I'm thinking the whole way over to my brother's, well, about 2/3 of the way, of how I'm going to break up with Kathy.
Which I don't get. I mean, he was going to end a perfectly good relationship because he felt rejected.
And then 2/3 of the way over there, I came to my senses, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I just spent 5 hours with this beautiful woman and her kids. I met her kids for the first time. This is not rejection. This is a good trade. This is trading a 1-hour breakfast for 5 hours together in the evening, where I also got to meet her children.
And one of the main reasons you knew to question your thoughts was through therapy. You knew to be more mindful.
Right. And so I immediately, when I seized on that thought, it comforted me. I felt fine. I was breathing good. I got to my brother's house, went to sleep, slept well. The next morning after the baptism, I got a text from Kathy saying, hey, are you still in town? And she said, my parents are going to watch my kids tonight so I can go to Adult State Conference. And would you like to come and pick me up, and we could go to dinner and then go to the conference together? And I said, sure. And so I stayed in town and hung out with my brother and his family. And then that night, Kathy and I had another date. Well, the next morning, I'm feeling so good. That was Sunday morning. I was back in my own ward, and I texted her and said, how about next weekend? Maybe we could plan something. And she said, yes, but my sister's going to be in town. And she's rarely in town. She lives in New York, and I need to know her schedule first. And immediately I'm all triggered again.
He actually wondered if I had a sister, and now he knows I do. We actually visited them in Africa while we were dating, and we're really glad she's in our lives, that she's not pretend, that she's not like, I'm washing my hair excuse.
Yeah, and in fact, but I came to my senses on that too, and thought, gee, look, Kathy just spent 2 evenings with me on a weekend she had her kids. This is not rejection. So the next Monday, I had a regularly scheduled appointment with my counselor, and I told her this whole embarrassing story, and I said, what in the heck is wrong with me? And she said, this counselor seems real, feels real, it's very powerful, and yet it's lying to you. And
that's what cognitive distortions do, and we all have them.
And she introduced me to that term at that time, cognitive distortions. And Joseph White chipped in during our previous presentation and said, fear is false evidence appearing real. And that's what a cognitive distortion is. It's where something that is perhaps perfectly innocuous triggers you some kind of a memory stored in your mind and body, and triggers anxiety. And the second thing here, for God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. Mid-singles, many of them who are very good people and will mistake their anxiety for the Holy Ghost, telling them, get out now. Now, I'm not saying if somebody's being genuinely abusive in some way, or if there are genuine red flags, that fear isn't
serving a good purpose.
Serving a good purpose. What I'm saying is that's not the way the Spirit will speak to you. The Spirit will speak to you by answering your prayer with peace. So the other thing is, rarely do you ever have to make a relationship decision right on the spur of the moment. Oh, I've got to get out now. Normally, you're going to have time to reflect, to pray, to think.
And sometimes I think just making a decision and moving in a direction, and then it either feels right or it doesn't. I know I had a lot of experiments like that. And sometimes moving in the direction of a person started feeling wrong, and then I knew, or vice versa. Sometimes I'd started moving in that direction and it felt good and right and comfortable.
And that's the next point. Leap off the high dive. Do it quickly. You know how if you stand on the high dive...
And we're not talking about jumping into a relationship, but jumping into an opportunity. Like if you're interested in someone, just go tell them.
Yeah. So, start something. If you stand there looking off the edge of the high dive, you know how terrifying that is. Just run and leap off the edge, and that's exhilarating. And that's how it'll be with dating. Realize that fear is normal. It is always along for the ride, but it shouldn't be in the driver's seat. It shouldn't control you. It shouldn't run you. And then be prepared occasionally to take no for an answer and move on. If somebody's not interested, it doesn't mean you're not great. It doesn't mean you're not worth it. It just means they want something different. Intentional personal development journey. Kathy alluded to this. Forgiveness is often very important if we've had a bitter divorce, even a non-bitter divorce. Recognizing the beam in my own eye, that means, I read a book that caused me a lot of pain when I first became a mid-single, because it helped me understand some of the ways that I had caused pain to my former wife. And it doesn't have to be blaming or shaming, but I remember finding pain in that message and realizing that there were things that clouded my vision at the time that I hadn't really fully understood. And being willing to grow and see our own weaknesses and the ways we've caused, we might have had part of we're part of the reason for the divorce and had some role in it. That can help. It's a lot more deeper conversation on a date, for example, when we talk about those kind of things, than when we're just sitting there telling each other how the partner was at fault and we were an innocent victim. Mighty change of heart is from a heart at war to a heart at peace. And that's an intentional choice to see people as God sees them, as his children, as infinitely valuable persons, rather than just the role we want them to play in our life. Putting down the rock 70 times 7. I remember being in a situation with my former wife where I thought that she was being manipulative, and I could feel that anger sort of rising in me. And I remember talking about it later with a therapist, and I said, every time I think I've forgiven her, then she starts to do something that I think is manipulative, which was something that really bothered me before. And I said, I would feel that myself picking up that rock. It was a metaphor we used often. And the therapist said, well, it's good that you can feel that you can feel yourself picking it up, because then you can put it down again. And sometimes we think when we've forgiven someone, forgive them now and we're done. But sometimes it just means continuing to put down that rock. How many times? 70 times 7. And then honor agency. Even if they left you for another woman or another man, even if they did something you think is horrible, honor their agency. God does, and we can't do
And
less.
I think honoring agency means accepting reality. I mean, it doesn't mean we approve of the behavior. It just means that we accept
that they have the right to do that, and that really there's nothing we can do about it. And that is the hard part of agency. Elder Holland talks about vulnerability. To give ourselves so totally to another person is the most trusting and perhaps the most faithful step we take in life. It seems such a risk and such an act of faith. None of us walking toward the altar would seem to have the confidence to reveal everything that we are, all our hopes, all our fears, all our dreams, all our weaknesses to another person. Safety and good sense and the world's experience would suggest that we hang back a little, that we not wear our heart on our sleeve, where it can be so easily hurt by one who knows so much about us. As we continue on with that and think about vulnerability, it's hard, but we want to be loved for who we are, not for the masks we wear. And then he makes a beautiful comparison of being vulnerable with how vulnerable was Jesus Christ in Gethsemane and on Calvary. He didn't hold back. Personal development leads to dating success. Number one is the point I just made about we want to be loved for who we are, not the masks we wear. Learn to sincerely listen and give emotional connection the way your partner needs it. That's important in creating love. Don't overshare too early, but be open about your history and allow yourself to be seen. If you had a problem with pornography, or if you had an affair during a former marriage, or whatever might be in your history that is unflattering, your future partners deserve to know about it, and you want to talk through with them what you've learned from it, how you dealt with it, and realize that the right person will accept you and understand that life hasn't been perfect for any of us. Also, it's a waste of time and energy trying to find love without risk. Speaking of how we talked about courtship before, Elder Ballard talks about courting as a lost art, that courtly love that Kathy and I were talking about. Hanging out is not the way, nor is it enough. I'm going to suggest boldly that the friend zone is not the way, generally is not the way to love, because it's trying to find love through the back door. It's trying to find it without risk. Now, I'm not saying you can't be friends with somebody that you're also dating or after you stop dating.
Well, in fact, friendship is a really important foundation of a loving relationship. But if it stops there and it's never discussed that there's interest, there's never, a defining conversation about your interest, there's no risk and there's no reward.
Stumbling blocks, the attempt to discover a method of finding love without risk. You can't believe the number of people I've talked to, invite this person to a party with 12 other people. It's trying to find love without risk and hoping something will happen and the other person will take the risk first. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
Well, and I do want to clarify something. There is reward in having friendships, for sure. There's just not reward of possibility of further exploration without a conversation and a risk on somebody's part, and then a risk on someone else's part to say, yes, let's try this.
On part two, I saw a post just today on Facebook where somebody talked about how their boyfriend of 8 years someone had seen them on a dating site. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, why do you have a boyfriend of 8 years? Sometimes we're so fixated on a particular person and trying to get them to be what we want them to be or to decide in our favor that we can really get stuck. And we want to avoid the second of these bullet points. There is a point when you have to settle down to one person and really give it a shot. And if somebody can't do that, or if their heart is not with you, we've got to be willing to accept that reality and move on instead of constantly trying to change this person's mind. 2 essential requirements to create and advance a relationship. Write these down. Someone takes a risk, the other exercises his or her agency and says, yes. critical not only to create a relationship, but to move it to the next level and the next. Relationship agreements can be anything from a single response in a messenger chat when you very first meet each other. And Kathy, it took her three messages before she said anything back.
Well, it took him 3 messages to get creative enough.
And finally, I wished her a happy birthday. I wished her 29th, and really she was 37 or something. But anyway.
And I had to correct him. So that's how he got me to respond.
And so these are examples of agreements, and these are some of the major kinds of transitional agreements, but there will be agreements all the way along. I didn't put this up there, but, Kathy at one point gave me the garage code for her house so I could come get settled in if I arrived in her town before she was back to meet me for a weekend, that sort of thing. And those are little symbols of increasing commitment.
It's a good thing you didn't take that for granted and come in and trash my house or anything.
And I never did.
No, he didn't.
I came in once to leave a gift, even after we broke up.
Well, that's a longer story.
Yeah, it's a longer story. The Gottman's 8 Dates. This book actually, The Gottman's 8 Dates, was not available when we were dating, but I think it's a great sort of missionary discussion program.
Right. These are fairly new, right?
Yeah, it's come out since we got married, but the Lean on Me date, trust, facing conflict in a healthy way, sex and passion, work and money, creating and maintaining physical and emotional intimacy when you have children, adventure and fun, personal growth and spirituality, which is dear to our hearts, and then the lifetime of love date, your dreams, what do you want the most in life? These seem to be a great summary, and Kathy and I discussed all of those things before we got married, but great summary of the real crucial issues in life. And if you can find ways to be intentional about all of these, both in courting and then during marriage, as you set up a marriage with intentional agreements and ideas about all of these things, it seems like you're setting yourself up to beat that 73% statistic.
Right. And every effort you make in courting and being intentional about having these discussions gives you skills that will be really valuable in marriage, because we continue dating each other every weekend.
Right. And that's an intentional thing we do, because if we aren't intentional about it, life gets in the way. The average American couple only spends 35 minutes a week talking.
And one of the presentations we attended, they spend 3 hours a day together on purpose, and they have their whole marriage. And it's one of the greatest things they've done that has strengthened them and made them not even consider, separating, because they enjoy their time together.
Right. How many couples only have sex at the end of the day when it's 11:30 at night and they're both exhausted? Well, maybe it doesn't happen that much if you do it that way. What if you don't give each other room to grow, as in number 5, and you don't make time for each other like we're talking about, and you only talk that 35 minutes a week, and it's just about when to drop the kids off here and there. So all of these are crucially important things to be intentional about. My list, everyone's going to have a different list. All I'm going to say about it at this time is that these were 4 things that I could focus on that were important to me. Now, 50, if you try to have 50 things, you're probably not going to pay attention to any of them. I suggest a short list.
Well, or you're going to tear your hair out trying to find someone that meets all of them.
My first one, I'm just going to say, is because I don't think two happy people rarely get together and have a lousy time, and happy people make happy marriages. The second one for me is about good communication that enhances the relationship rather than damages it. And then 4 should be obvious, because that's so fundamental to who I am. And then the third one, of course, is it's just needless complication if that's an issue. So. And
for me, my list, I actually had 4 also. I actually had it written right in my planner. I put it on a Post-it note, actually, and then I transferred it to each new calendar year because I didn't know when I'd get married, and I just wanted it always top of mind. I kind of tried to be sneaky and put my 50 things into 4 categories. But the categories really clarified for me what I was looking for. I was looking for someone who could build a house of God, a house of faith, a house of the gospel. You know, that was one of mine. The other was to build a house of love. And you know, I had various, you know, notes on what that meant to me. Also, a house of family. I wanted more children, and it became apparent to me that it was a conflict if I was dating someone who really didn't, you know, want more children, and so that became important to me. A house of family, and a house. Let's see, a house of God, a house of love, a house of family, and a house of order. I really, really thrive when my environment is orderly in my home, in my finances, in, you know, every facet of life, even with my schedule. Like I like order, and our God is the God of order, and that's how I feel most happy and thrive best. So that's my list.
And if you have 4 sort of broad categories, at least those are things you can memorize and keep in your mind. If you've got 50 things on your list, you probably won't be able to consciously keep those in mind as you're meeting and dating people. And that's really the point.
And for me, focusing on what I wanted to create with someone moving forward made it kind of alive, rather than like a stagnant list of, you know, requests of a person, more as like somebody who built the character and also had the desire to go in the same direction.
And having a list is part of being intentional. The role of the Spirit in choosing a spouse. I'll let you read this for yourself, but it's a quote by Elder McConkie about the balance between agency and inspiration. And he's suggesting that we do all we can in our power to learn about something and then seek an answer. And he talks specifically about marriage here. This was a talk he gave at BYU where he said lots of people want to fast and pray and do all this stuff and get the Lord to tell them that's the person. And he said, well, it might be a little shock to you, but never in my life did I ever ask the Lord whom I ought to marry. Never occurred to me to ask him. I went out and found the girl I wanted. She suited me. I evaluated and weighed the proposition, and it just seemed 100% to me as though this ought to be. He admits, if I'd done things perfectly, I'd have done some counseling with the Lord, which I didn't do. But all I did was pray to the Lord and ask for some guidance and direction in connection with the decision that I had reached. And he says a more perfect thing would have been to do some counseling.
But the fact that he seemed 100% that it's something that ought to be is the answers that I was referring to when I've made a decision and I move forward. And if it feels really good, like 100%, I mean, that seems like an answer from the Spirit, even if you didn't ask the question directly.
The reason that I put this in the presentation is because I've seen so many mid-singles that get so anxious after 1 or 2 dates. They're running off to the temple and they're fasting and praying and they're trying to find out, is this the one? I don't want to waste my time if they're not the one. And I think sometimes that's kind of rushing the process.
Right, because we can't really know a person after one meeting or one phone call.
And that's sort of not doing our part, not exercising our own agency yet, and then taking it to the Lord. So a little patience is important in this process.
I believe it's 4 seasons and a road trip is ideal.
I don't discourage praying and going to the temple and asking for guidance and all that. I'm against pushing it, you know, where instead of getting to know this person, I'll run off to the temple and try to get a revelation, not get to know the person. And of course, do some counseling with the Lord all along.
And most times if I prayed about whether I should continue dating someone, that the very next time I saw them, and the answer would appear in the date itself, usually.
Very often that can be true. These are some compatibility considerations. The pursuer distance or polarity is, do you have a situation where you've got a tug of war where one party wants a lot more of the other party's time and attention and the other party wants less and less and they're pulling in separate directions?
Right. It's interesting. We have an interesting dynamic because we both like a lot of togetherness and we both like a lot of independence.
So, yeah, and you know, we're not always on the same page at the same moment with that, and that requires some negotiation and things. But generally, we're well matched that way. Me and my first wife were not. I wanted a lot more intimacy and closeness, and you know, and she wanted a lot more just sort of separateness. Maybe being in the same room together, but doing our own stuff, not talking too much. And see, I had a 4-year degree in family science, and this was a question I didn't even know to ask when I was first getting married. But that's you know, you can work.
And you had
that.
the degree at that time.
Oh yeah, I was a second-year law student when I met.
Sometimes only experience can lead us to the questions to ask.
Right, but I think that's an important one to ask. It's not that we couldn't have figured out a way to make that polarity closer and to work that situation out. If we could have, you know, if we'd been able to work together. But what I'm saying is you wouldn't want to ideally to start out a marriage with that big of a difference between you. And that's something to think about. I say that suffering together is the Kathy test. She was sick for a good portion of the first 2 years we were married. And I won't go into detail on that, but it's just, that was a very difficult thing because we were newly married. I had 2 new stepkids and a new wife, and she had a new husband. And then we had that on top of it. And, you know, I loved her. And so we persevered through it. And hopefully in the long run, it made us closer. But could you suffer with this person, or is it only a relationship you like if it's hearts and flowers and it's always the way you want?
Sometimes we wondered why, when we first started dating, it wasn't easier, you know, why it was more difficult, and why we ended up breaking up and being just friends for a whole year.
A couple of times we broke up. But.
Well, but the biggest thing is that we were only, you know, friends for like an entire year, and found that we still really enjoyed communicating with each other and growing from each other's thoughts and impressions and insights as we were friends. And I think that it prepared us, like, so that when we got married, we knew each other on several different levels. So when I did get sick, Jeff knew me more fully than if we had gotten married more quickly.
This third one, I have a short story on too. Can you and your partner make intentional agreements about handling conflict and other important matters and keep your word? Kathy attended a funeral with me shortly after we got back together and shortly before we got engaged. And that night we had a long conversation about some of the circumstances around our breaking up and things. And it was an emotional, kind of difficult conversation. And there were several times during that conversation that things started to get a little bit heated, and Kathy would say, we need to stop, or we need to pray. And we would kneel down and pray. And this probably happened 5 or 6 times that night. And I remember thinking, this is the woman I want to marry, because she's capable of seeing a situation like that and shifting it through intentional action. And we're also big believers in timeouts. The Gottmans say that if you're, John Gottman says that if you reach 100 beats per minute in your heart rate, or your partner does, there's a 0% chance of reaching a resolution. And interestingly, when they told people in their experiment that there were technical difficulties, even when there weren't, and they made them sort of go to their corners and stop talking for long enough for them to calm down, they could bring them back together and they could solve things. But when they were flooded emotionally, they couldn't do it, which means it's important to be able to call a timeout when one or both people are flooded.
You'll do a lot of damage prevention that way.
And
because we say the stupidest things when we're emotionally flooded and we can't handle ourselves.
And then hurt each other's feelings worse. And yeah, and then most of the time you're not hearing 90% of what the other person says. You hear the 10% that's really harsh. And so it's very important to be able to make intentional agreements, like when somebody calls time out, pause button immediately, no last words, no parting shots, none of that. We're going to be apart for at least 20 minutes.
When things get stressful, pray.
Right.
But we're willing to. But like, even if we don't feel like it, even if we don't want to, we're willing to do that.
If you just do, or if we just do what we feel like doing in the moment, or if we just wait until something comes up to decide how to deal with it, okay, that's not intentional and it will do damage. We tell our kids all the time, most people do, make the decision what you're going to do when you're offered drugs or when you have the opportunity to have sex or if you're offered alcohol or whatever. We tell them, have the decision made so that it's already been made when the pressure's on and you'll know exactly what to say. Okay, in dealing with marital conflict, same thing. Have your procedure in place so that when the pressure's on, when you're flooded, you don't have to think through what to do because you don't think good in moments.
We'll go more into that when we write our book on intentional marriage. This is intentional courtship, and therefore these are conversations and even observations you can make with your dating partners to see, how you would go about handling conflict.
When I mentioned this conversation, Kathy and I had too, that was one that we had during courtship, not when we were married, about when she kept suggesting that we pray. And it's a principle you can practice with the dating partners that you get more serious with. Are your fundamental value systems compatible? Kathy at one time dated someone who had a very strong belief in being a vegetarian. She didn't feel like that served her health needs and whatever. You can agree or disagree with that, but the point is, fundamentally, if that's a values system or a belief system, as Kathy calls it, if it's just sort of something somebody's done for their own health reasons or whatever, that's a different thing.
Right, because for instance, Jeff has celiac and he's been gluten-free for many, many years. I think over a dozen years by the time we met. And he ate gluten-free and he didn't care if I ate gluten during a meal. In fact, he'd make it for me and then he'd make his gluten-free option. And
it was not a religious principle.
Right, and therefore it was compatible because it was just a personal choice rather than a belief system. When it's a belief system, and not just religion, but very strong values, you want to share that in common with a partner if it's important to you.
The next part is kind of along the same lines, only it's directly regarding sexual intimacy. Many mid-singles have been married before and have a rough idea of the role this plays in marriage and what their own hangups might be. So it's important to be very honest about that. I mean, as we know, whether most Latter-day Saints admit
not all of it. It's hangups. It's what their
preferences
and.
I mean, I might, feel like we should be intimate twice a week and my partner might think twice a year and that's going to be a problem. So, discuss what you want to do as a couple, and not only in terms of frequency, but do you have boundaries within the sexual relationship that you don't want to cross? Be very honest with your partners about those. You don't want to be deceptive in this area of life. And also, the sexual relationship, let's be honest, is a very important part of marriage. If you're dating someone who doesn't feel that way, that's important for you to know that. If you don't feel like it is and you don't want to have that much of it, be honest with that and find someone who you can live with that way. Same fundamental priorities when it comes to your spouse and children. Kathy, maybe you can take that one.
Can you accept each other's children as your own, and do you share similar child-rearing philosophies? I think this can become apparent when we're dating, because as we introduce our children, then we get to know how our dating partner accepts them. Fundamental priorities.
God, spouse, children.
Oh, right. I asked everyone I dated what their priority order was between self, spouse, children, God. And I got many answers. And Jeff and I have the same order. For us, our first priority is to God. and the second is to ourselves. It's not selfish, it's actually a responsibility. We have a responsibility to care for our own needs so that we can be a better spouse and partner, which actually comes third, and then our children come fourth. Now, it's a given that the children we already have need our protection and our care. I wouldn't have married someone that didn't love my children too. But I've had relationships where they were better to my children than to me. And that isn't acceptable. It doesn't work in a marriage. And, really ultimately, once the children leave home and get spouses of their own and create worlds of their own as gods, like in other universes, we're left with our partner. And that is the most significant, relationship in life. But we first have to make sure that we are honoring God's laws, because they're there for our highest good, and also taking care of our own needs so that we can be good partners and then good parents. Because if we're good partners to each other, really, truly, we're going to be better parents too.
Agreed. The last point there, can you work together in an intentional way to create a safe place when trauma is triggered? I won't go into great detail on this because we've talked about it, but I've mentioned every mid-single has some trauma, everyone that I've ever known. And so it's not finding someone that will never trigger you or who you will never trigger. It's really about working together in an intentional way to create safe space when trauma is triggered. And we've talked about a few of the ways to do that, but you're going to need to get creative and talk about it in a lot more detail than we can cover here. All right.
We're wrapping up.
This is a big shift, but a lot of mid-singles have a lot of fears and worries about being good enough, about having the scarlet letter D or, of divorce or whatever on, and feeling like they don't fit in or belong in the church. We are a kingdom of priests and a priesthood of kings. Think about that for a minute. I won't go into detail about this, but the coronation oath of every English king since 975 AD for more than 1,000 years has been to defend the faith, to keep the peace, to establish justice and mercy, and invoke the blessings of heaven on the realm. When I started thinking before I began dating, after my second divorce, about what I really wanted, it occurred to me that I had been anointed to become a king. And I started looking for my queen. And it changed how I thought about things. And this is my queen. Think about this quote from President John Taylor. Do you feel as though some dreadful calamity has happened to you? Maybe you got divorced. Maybe you were widowed. Maybe you had lost a long-time love that you never got married to. Have you forgot who you are and what your object is? Have you forgot that you are to be saints of the Most High God, clothed upon with the holy priesthood? Have you forgot that you are aiming to become kings and priests to the Lord and queens and priestesses to him? Final slide. God designs his people, this is President George Q. Cannon, called Latter-day Saints, to be a kingdom of priests and kings, and that nothing the Father has that he will not give unto us, for all will be ours, everything we can conceive of, glory, immortality, and endless lives. The blessings of eternal marriage can still be ours. I met this stunning woman, and 2 years later, at the age of 50, I knelt at the altar in the temple and reclaimed all of the blessings that I felt like I had lost when I got divorced. And I want to, the mid-singles that we're talking to with our book and with our organization, to understand that nothing is out of their reach. They're not too old. They haven't passed the season of life when this can be claimed. They have all the kingly or queenly power they need to claim every blessing that God has for his children. So that's the end of our presentation. And we're grateful that you've been here to join us for this, and hope that you'll join our social media pages and follow us. And
just remember, we're at Love in Later Years. And if you forget Love in Later Years, just remember Lily is our acronym and our symbol flower.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.